What events transformed your life? Sometimes our greatest defining moments are born out of tremendous personal tragedy. In this episode, Ron Garber, attorney and co founder of the Yaya Foundation, discusses how the death of his daughter led to his fight against a rare disease. Welcome to the show, Ron. How are you?
Oh, Bam, thanks so much for having me. I'm great.
Good, good. For everyone who's watching, Ron is a mergers and acquisition lawyer who now works for one of the world's largest medical device companies. And recently, Ron, you were named, I think, 40 under 40, which in our profession is kind of a big deal. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But in addition to being, a lawyer, you also play basketball at the University of Michigan, is it?
Yeah, so I'm 6'9", which you can't tell by my current camera shot. But yeah, I played basketball, or sort of sat the bench on the basketball team for the University of Michigan, and then played overseas in Israel for a year after college.
So it's lawyer meets basketball pro, or basketball pro meets lawyer, whichever one. But you're quite accomplished. And the most recent thing that you've been working on has been the Yaya Foundation. Now tell the audience what the Yaya Foundation is and how it came to be.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, AB. So the Yaya Foundation for 4-H leukodystrophy is a patient group that represents patients and families affected by an ultra rare disease called 4-H leukodystrophy. My wife, June, and my daughter, Yaya, had 4-H leukodystrophy. And during her life, we decided we need to do something about this, and we can talk more about her life and our life together, and why we felt that way. But what we do is fight for patients and families affected by the disease, and we're the only organization in the world that does that. In fact, when our daughter Yaya was alive, we couldn't believe that there wasn't someone else doing that, and so we decided to do it ourselves, so we support research, and we're working with labs all over the world in a really, I think, cool and innovative way to accelerate their work to learn more about the disease and develop therapies that will help kids that are affected by it, and also providing educational and emotional support to families, because when you get a diagnosis like this in your family, there's so little information about it's hard to find. Your doctors don't know about the disease. You have to learn about it, and so having there being a way to educate families that are affected, we think is really, really important.
So tell me a little bit about what this disease actually is, because I know you said it's a rare disease, which means most of us have probably never heard about it. So what is it actually?
Sure. Yeah. No one's ever heard of it, including most doctors and most neurologists and geneticists. But 4-H, also, it's also called POLR3 related leukodystrophy. It even has a weird sounding name. It's not very approachable, but it's a genetic neurological disease that typically presents in kids, small kids, and it inhibits the body's ability to develop myelin, which is a really important part of the brain and allows neurological signals to transmit from the brain to different parts of the body. And the disease burden is really, really heavy. It presents often in kids who were otherwise sort of developing normally and doing just fine. So it comes completely out of the blue. It did for us, and totally upends this kid's life and her or his parents' lives, and then it's a progressive disease. It gets worse over time. It's really challenging because it gets worse at different rates and in different ways for different kids over time. But over time, kids who may have been able to talk and walk and sort of otherwise were developing just fine start to lose those abilities. They lose their abilities to move around, to talk, to walk.
Yeah.
and ultimately to coordinate swallow. And that's ultimately what causes really, really significant problems for kids. Kids lose the ability to swallow, and so to feed themselves. And so we need feeding support and feeding tubes, and then ultimately to manage sort of the secretions in our sort of ear, nose, and throat that we all have, saliva and whatnot, and so that ultimately leads to lung damage, and so the pneumonia and the disease is ultimately fatal as a result. And kids, pass away anywhere from really, really young, like our daughter Yaya, to their sort of teenage years or even into their 20s. But otherwise normally developing kids just suffer this slide, and ultimately pass away from the disease.
So Ron, as you know, this show is about defining moments. So I want to go there because you were, as I often say, you were minding your business, right? You were working as a lawyer, happily married, got pregnant, had this little girl, and then what happened?
Yeah. So, I love the defining moments theme, because in so many ways, our life with Yaya has been the defining moment, of at least my adult life. So, June and I both come from really, really tight families. We were so excited to, be having our first child, and, not the kind of parents who are like, should we have kids? Should we not? Like, we got married, and we were ready to go and really excited about it. And when June got pregnant with Yaya, everything was fine. And when she was born, everything was normal. And I remembered sitting in the hospital the morning before we were going home, and lying in the hospital bed. I think June was asleep, and Yaya was laying down on my stomach, and I just felt like the king of the world, and I still have this photo that, it was one of the happiest moments of my life. And we went home, and kind of our first month together was, the kind of chaotic and crazy, but also amazing, time as a family with a newborn. And then when she was 6 weeks old, and I still remember this so clearly, I was standing in the kitchen, and I got an email ding on my phone, and it was my weekly newsletter that comes every week to tell me, this week your baby should be doing this and this. And for some reason, it really struck me that smiling was on this list. And because Yaya wasn't smiling, and even though, baby smile at 6 weeks, and this was the 6-week email, it wasn't like she was late, but maybe we had a sense that something was perhaps wrong, because it struck me so hard. And June told me later she had the exact same feeling when she got whatever newsletter she receives. And from that time on,
was that because both of you hadn't noticed that she hadn't smiled?
we hadn't said anything about it. It wasn't we had no level of concern at all. Everything seemed fine. We didn't have a comparison point, she was our first, and so we didn't know well enough that something was wrong. Like now, her little brother is 2 years old, and he was smiling at 4 weeks, and so maybe with more experience we would have known. But I don't know why it hit me so hard, but it did. And over the next, and then we really went into a year-long sort of, first concern. It's not like we got this email and we were devastated, and because we were just like, that's really unusual. That's scary. And we talked to our doctor about it, and we went through this period of being concerned, but no one else being concerned. Our doctor said, I think she said, I'm 90% not worried, which was really scary for us. 10% is a lot when you're talking about your baby. And
with your first child, you don't have a measure, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so we take the doctor's word, and so we ask, should we be seeing specialists? Should we do something? No, let's wait a month. Let's see. And, you know, concern then turned to fear because Yaya's condition became worse and we still didn't know what was going on. And it just sort of kept gradually getting worse to really ultimately despair. But during those first couple of months, you know, I tell these stories. It's, first of all, it's really hard for me to go to these places sort of emotionally.
Yeah,
I've kind of
me
built
too.
walls around them. And I don't want anyone to feel bad for us or me or my family or even Yaya, especially Yaya. But I think our stories are really representative of what a lot of families affected by our disease go through. And I think what a lot of
Yeah,
families affected by rare disease in general go through. And so, you know, I hope that sharing them sort of speaks to the burden of these diseases and why we've decided to do something about it.
yeah,
But you know, when we were at the beginning, when sort of the doctors were telling us, let's just wait and see, you know, kids don't all develop at the same rate, and so hopefully things will get better. um, you know, we were living a normal life. Like I was, and everyone was expecting us to live a normal life. So I had to go to work every day. June had to go to work every day,
yeah,
and we sort of
yeah,
had to perform and be ourselves, and that was really hard to do because of just this frankly crushing worry that we had about her. Worse, we had to treat her as normal. We would drop her off at daycare, and AB, I can't tell you how. I mean, it's hard for me to talk about now. Like, you know, with us, she felt safe, she felt comfortable. She gradually developed more challenges. She it was harder for her to feed. Again, we didn't know why, but with us, she could sort of feed more regularly and sleep more regularly in her crib, and at daycare she couldn't, and because of, I think, the chaos, you know, the just chaos of being in daycare with other kids around her, and being in a less comfortable setting. And so, you know, we had like an app through which the daycare would tell us, oh, you know, your child just drank X ounces of milk, and, you know, she's supposed to be drinking a certain amount of milk to grow and be healthy. And we would get these
yeah,
notifications, and it would be like, Yaya just had, you know, and I would be really excited. Oh, good, she ate. And then it would be like half an ounce, you know, and which is like an eighth of what she's supposed to be having. And so, you know, we would take her to daycare Monday through Wednesday, and my parents would watch her Thursday and Friday. And we just got into this cycle of, by Sunday night, you know, I could not bring her to
yeah,
daycare the next day. And you know, then Sunday night I would finally I'd just say, I'd call my mom and dad and say, hey guys, you know, I just, can you take her on Monday instead? I can. And you know, AB, all while this is going on, we don't know what to do about it. Like, you know,
yeah,
we're her parents, we just want to do something, but we don't know what to do about it because we don't know why it's happening. And um gosh, not to, you know, another part of that is that, you know, we start to maybe blame ourselves. Did I do something wrong?
oh,
And I remember that, you know, this is the
mhm,
craziest story, but you know, when she was about maybe 5 months old, 6 months old, you know, her situation was really getting worse. And I remember one day under her crib, I found a box, and it was my parents for my birthday had given me like a thing to, like, it's called a mushroom log. Like, it's a piece of wood that you can grow mushrooms on, you know, just a weird birthday gift that I would have enjoyed. I like that kind of stuff. And so, but I just was terrified that, oh my God, did she catch like some fungal infection from
oh
this
my
mushroom log?
word,
And for
yeah,
AB, for a day and a half, I was convinced that's what it was. I couldn't tell June. I was just super guilty
yeah,
as a result. And that's just when you have this
you don't know.
terrifying thing and you don't know, your brain just goes to crazy places. So that before getting a diagnosis was just really, really scary and hard time.
Wow. You know, you say these things about taking her to daycare and how you just couldn't do it at some point. I mean, I had a fully healthy baby at 18 months, and I remember taking him to a daycare once. And he was fine, right? There's nothing wrong with him. But I would go there and I would just watch what was going on in that daycare center. And day after day, I would come back and he hadn't eaten. And I'd just be like, what is happening? And the thought that someone might be hurting my child really scared me, right? Even though none of that was happening, but I cannot even imagine that when you have a child who you can see that she's not well, you don't know what's wrong, you know in your heart of heart that nobody else can take care of her like you can, right? It must have been just a nightmare. Now, in that period, and I know you did tell us you don't want us to feel sorry for you, and I hear that and I respect it, Ron. The thing that I think would be really great would be to understand just how you came to get that diagnosis and what were some of the things that you learned along the way, right? For other families who may be dealing with this, to just have hope and to know that someone else out there experienced something similar.
Yeah. So getting a diagnosis is so important, and it's so hard to do. You know, we during those months when that I was just talking about, you know, a lot of that time was spent honestly in labs, like waiting to get samples, because I
Yeah.
mean, we would go to the doctor 2 times a week, 3 times a week, sometimes for a full visit, you know, to the neurologist, once for an MRI. But many times just to get a blood sample, a urine sample, um, and you know, we wanted so badly to know, but you know, first of all, we only know, like, not every disease is diagnosable, but more to the point, in our
Mm-hmm.
case, a lot of diagnostic testing is required for this stuff, and like health, we have good health insurance, for which we're really, you know, lucky and grateful, but trying to get insurance to cover diagnostic testing is hard. And so, you know, at first we only had kind of the low level tests available to us, and everything would come back normal. And um and I remember once our geneticist telling me, you know, if things get worse, then we can do a whole exome sequencing, like a sophisticated genetic test where we read every single letter on Yaya's exome. And I didn't even think about that, because I thought, you know what, things get worse, you know, that's not going to happen. And
Exactly.
but but no, we spent, you know, months in doctors' offices, and actually, a big game changer was when my dad said, why don't you guys go see a gastroenterologist? I mentioned she had been developing feeding issues. You know, I didn't even know what a gastroenterologist was, AB, and our
And why
primary.
would you? Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And right, most of us don't, young parents or whatever. Our primary care provider never said go see a gastro, you know, it wasn't her, but yeah, I was having more and more problems feeding, and my dad said, why don't you go see a gastro? And we said it to our physician, and she said, why not, go for it? And so so I called and
Mhm.
tried to schedule a swallow study, and AB, they were like, you know, sure, here's a date in 2 months that you can have a swallow study. And I didn't know, you know, I didn't know what to do. I just took it, and I said, do you have anything sooner? No. Okay, well, you know, over just day by day, things are getting more challenging. And so I called back and said, hey, look, we need to move this up. And, you know, please. And so they moved it up to like 4 weeks out. And you know, I just couldn't believe it. And you know, maybe a week later, more and more trouble feeding, and I just called back and said, look, guys, this is really important, you need to get us in. And they said, oh, we can get you in tomorrow. And you know, the lesson there, and it shouldn't be this way, but the lesson is, it's the burden is on us as parents
Yes.
to fight. And so we fought through, we want this test. The insurance says, no, we won't pay for it. We appeal to the insurance and, win an appeal and get a test and what have you. And it's, it ends up taking a huge part of parents' lives, and it's not right, but it just is, until we do something about it. And
nothing
so,
stops during this time, right? Like, life doesn't say, okay, I'm gonna wait while you go through this whole thing. Like, life is happening, work is happening, and that is incredibly hard. And I can't think of a way we can make the system better, right? Because you have to work to have insurance. But then if insurance doesn't cover what you need, then you're taking time off work to go figure out all this other stuff. It's like a crazy twisted circle.
insurance doesn't cover the full burden of, nowhere near it, of any of this situation. And it's not a good system. And so that's why we have to help people in this situation.
Yeah.
But the swallow study, just talking about the diagnosis, that was a big game changer. And it just shows that, that we had to get there by ourselves. We wouldn't have gotten there if it weren't for my dad making this comment. But we went in for that swallow study, and I was at work that day. I was expecting for just a quick test and go back to work. And I met June and Yaya's auntie, who had taken her to the hospital for the test. And we went in for the swallow study, and AB, we didn't go home for 3 weeks after that. She failed the swallow study on all consistencies of food, which indicated that she had serious problems swallowing. And we were immediately admitted to the hospital, because basically what they told us is there's no safe way for her to eat, because she's aspirating. Food and drink is going into her lungs. And yeah, and that ultimately, it's very sad memory for me, but it changed the trajectory, at least of our understanding what was going on. Because remember that geneticist comment about, if things get worse, we can do a whole exome sequencing. Well,
yeah,
failing a swallow study and a 3-week hospitalization sort of met that bar, and we were able to then get an exome sequencing, which ultimately led to a diagnosis. But I think that was really that was the moment where, okay, now our care team sort of understands that. Now our care team and we are aligned. Like we were already there in terms of our concern and worry.
yeah,
But now, like, the medical community is right there with us. And so we were in the hospital for 3 weeks, and she had a feeding tube put in, which actually was a huge help, because it allowed her to, she had all these problems feeding, and she started to, once we got out of the hospital and she was able to feed, she started to gain weight. And so really, I'm so grateful that it happened, because it helped her so much over the next few months. But yeah, it's just really dumb luck that we were able to get to the hospital and get that test, and get things ultimately kind of figured out.
And to move that appointment up, I keep going back to that appointment, right, where they had said 2 months, and you fought to bring it back and bring it back and bring it back. And I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if you had just said, well, they said 2 months, and this little baby is just not able to eat. Now, this is going to be a little bit hard for you, but I'll just ask you to give me a picture of what daily life looks like. You've talked already about having to manage work and all of that, but what did daily life look like? Because I think when we talk about healthcare reform, right, sometimes it sounds like we're talking over here in the stratosphere. And when I think about the granularity of it and what's happening on the ground, it's really important for people to understand how things like this can really impact your daily life. It's not something that's happening over there, it's here. So for you and June, what was that like in terms of work, shopping, sleeping, just being married? Like, what was that journey like in very practical terms?
Yeah. So in practical terms, just the pure nuts and bolts of it is caring for a medically complicated child is requires a lot of work, and I loved doing the work. So again, I don't ask anyone to feel sorry for us for this, but it speaks to your point of, we so when we got home from the hospital, Yaya had a feeding tube. We didn't yet know what her diagnosis was, so we didn't know what her trajectory was. That only came a couple months later. She
Oh
got
wow! So
tested.
even at that point, you didn't know.
Yeah, I'm sorry for not making that clear. We left the hospital. She had been tested. It takes a month or so for that test to be turned around, and in our case, it took almost 2 months because the results were so dire, and so this lab had never tested for this before, and so it took time. But
Wow.
we got home, and really all we knew was that we had a medical. We didn't know, we didn't have a timeline, we didn't have a trajectory for her, but we just had to manage her care. So there were I tell people this is like the most productive time of my life. There was never a down moment, except for some, we would eat like ice cream at night, when we had a moment after bedtime and after,
Yeah.
doing our work and stuff. But
Yeah.
just, she had a feeding tube. We would have to change her feeding bags every 4 hours, and then sort of prepare new ones for the next day. Medications. She had a wound from her surgery that we had to clean a couple times a day, and so there was just, we were, and Yaya was amazing. So she was an amazing little girl. We loved her. We had lots of good time with her too, and I don't want to gloss over that, but we lots of time playing and reading and singing and cuddling and all this stuff, which was amazing. So just know that with what I'm about to say, but we were also really like nurses at home. We were doing just
Yeah.
a lot of, like, June, was really a nurse, learned how to cut gauze and clean wound and everything. And we were injecting medication with syringes. We were giving her shots once a week. And so it was all of our time, and it was between the time commitment and just being emotionally a wreck. I had, like very little capacity for anything else, and so
Yeah.
my work really, everything else in my life sort of took a back seat, I think appropriately, but at some cost. I was fortunate. I had a good job, and I had great colleagues who, I went to the hospital thinking I'd be there for an hour, and I was there for 3 weeks, and I had amazing colleagues who sort of picked up the slack on stuff that I was working on. And I'm really grateful for that. I had a workplace that was patient with me, and gave me, said, like, you take the space that you need to look
Yeah.
after your family. And I know that that's not something everybody has.
Everybody
And
has.
so I was fortunate, and even still, it was at great cost to us, just in terms of, it just made work very challenging, and we weren't able to work a lot that year, and which had consequences for us. And
Yeah.
but yeah, so the day-to-day life was just very, very, and when we got back from the hospital, I don't think we even left our apartment for like probably really a month, because it was so much work to get the feeding tube disconnected from the wall. And I remember once we went to a coffee shop. The first time we went out, it was about a month after we got home from the hospital. We went to a coffee shop, and we sort of had timed it perfectly because we had, X minutes of battery power, and we were going to go to the coffee shop on the feeding tube. And we were going to just go, and we brought some toys, and we were just going to have try to have a normal time out. And
Yeah.
it started raining, and we said, no, we're doing this anyway. And so we ran through the rain to this coffee shop and had a nice time. But we didn't day-to-day life just turned upside down
Yeah.
because of all of the sort of work required just to manage our life together.
Yeah. And Ron, we're able to talk about the Yaya Foundation because ultimately you lost your daughter. This whole ordeal, like we said, was a defining moment for you. I feel like there's just sitting here, I can almost feel like just not what you're going through, because I cannot stand in your shoes, but I know it's really hard. So I wouldn't even put you through walking us through how that was. But I do want to talk about one more thing about Yaya before we move to the foundation. There was something you said to me about her smile. And if you can share that, because when you and I talked about it, it sounded to me like one of the absolute highlights, right? And it just kept me going since we last spoke. It just made me so just remember the small things in life. So what were some of your just highlights with Yaya?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Abby. That's yeah, I mentioned that the first really what got our attention or made us worried initially was that she wasn't smiling when kids typically start to smile. And so we we would try to make her smile, from 6 weeks to 4 months. We would just desperately try to make her smile, to just make this problem go away. And um, boo and funny faces and everything. Just thinking like, okay, if we can just make her smile, the problem is gone and everything is back to normal. And she didn't. And so, it was a really hard time being a parent because we were so scared, and we were like not getting the kind of sugar, if you will, in the form of
Yeah.
smiles and giggles that sort of keep us going as parents of young children. And ultimately, and I want to talk about her diagnosis too, but after she got diagnosed and we got sort of settled and we understood what was going on, we could see that so she wasn't able to, her brain wasn't sending signals to make her muscles in her face move, to make her lips curl up, but we could see in her eye that she was smiling, like she had smiley eyes. And actually, 3 times her lips did curl up, and we saw a smile. One day we came home from work, and at that time she was no longer in daycare, and an amazing woman who, her auntie, would stay home with her. And she was, when we got home, she was so excited because she said Yaya was smiling, and she told us that she was like sort of giving her raspberries under her arm, and that would make Yaya kind of giggle and smile. And so, show us, and so she did it, and like, sure enough, a big smile from
Yeah.
Yaya, and we just
Yeah.
we were so happy. We immediately like took out the phones and videotaped it, and I was just looking at it this morning, a freeze from a video of her, with what for her is a big smile. And there were 2 other times, once when I was away for a night at a friend's wedding and came back the next day, and she saw me and her lips curled up. Another time when I was playing with her and kind of just being upside down and doing push-ups while she was lying on the floor, and she smiled when I kind of got to her face. And so so I really treasure those smiles.
The fact that you remember very specifically 3 times that she smiled, right? And I'm just thinking, just today, can I count? Do I know how many times my son smiled today? I don't, right? Um, and I wanted you to share that because the first time you shared it with me, it was a real lesson in appreciating what we have, because there's so much that we take for granted, right? And the idea that you would have given anything to see Yaya smile, and that to this day, you remember the 3 times her lips curled up and she gave this smile. It's just, it's very humbling. It's very touching, but it's also just a reminder that nothing is promised, and we just really need to appreciate the things that we have. You know, did I ever think when my son was 6 weeks old that he should or shouldn't be smiling? It's just this thing that we take for granted because you're hitting the milestone. So you don't even know that it's a milestone because everything's fine. And so just thank you so much for sharing that story and for just being vulnerable with me. I cannot imagine what that was like for you. And I know you do want to talk about her diagnosis. And so I'll turn it back to you to walk us through that and then eventually into the foundation as well.
Thanks. Yeah. So, and amen, AB, to everything you just said. You know, it's like I didn't even know that this world existed, rare disease, and that things like this could happen to a child. But after going through it, you know, with Yaya's brother, you know, it was sort of flipped. Like if one, I'll talk about her diagnosis in a second, but essentially it's one letter in the genome that is wrong, that is flipped, and it has this devastating effect. And you know, we have billions of these in our genome, and if one of those can be wrong, it can. And I just, when we were having our son, I thought, you know, there's no way it will be 100%. You know, it would be impossible for it to be, and so I just didn't even contemplate how he could be healthy. And now but he is, and I appreciate it in a way that I just never would have. And I do treasure all of his smiles and his health in a way that you know, we just don't know how to if we haven't been through an experience from this. And I do hope that sort of a lesson from experiences of families like mine for other people is to treasure our health, treasure each other's health, do what we can to protect our own health and the health of our friends and neighbors. But so I just amen to everything you just said.
When I hear you speak about just one thing, it was just one thing that was out of place or not where we're supposed to be. I think when we talk about the miracle of life and health, it really is magical, isn't it? Because to think that one thing can set you up on a different course, it's sobering, but more than anything else for me, it's just magical. That time and time again, many of us come into the world with everything in place, right? And it's mind-blowing. We take it for granted.
For sure. Yeah. And maybe I'll tell about Yaya's diagnosis and it will give some color around what we're talking about here with this letter being out of place. But so when Yaya was in the hospital, she got a whole exome sequencing, which is where a lab, you know, takes a cell from her body and literally decodes a portion of the genome, all of the A's and T's and G's and C's. And it turned out that one of those, a pair on the exome had, you know, where there was supposed to be a C, for example, there was a G, and it was in a really important place in the exome, and it's associated with this disease. So we went, you know, months went by, and it was supposed to be a month, turned into 2, and ultimately they called us into the geneticist office, and I mean, at this point, I knew I had a feeling it was not going to be good. And when they called to make the appointment, they said, you don't need to bring Yaya with you. So I knew that at that time it would be, you know, really bad news. But it, you know, I didn't know how bad, and it sort of just kept getting worse, AB. But we went in and we met with our geneticist and genetic counselor, and they told us, you know, Yaya has a disease. It's called 4-H leukodystrophy, POLR3 related leukodystrophy. Just like we were saying at the beginning of our conversation, you know, what's that?
Yeah.
And you know, only a few hundred people had it at that time, had been diagnosed with it, and our geneticist knew nothing about it. And basically,
in the US or in the world?
in the world, in the
Wow.
world, yeah,
That is rare.
it's extremely rare. We can talk about it. I think it's not as rare as we all think. It's hard to diagnose, and so I think, you know, there are probably more cases than just those reported cases, and but you know, our geneticist didn't know anything about it and gave us like 3 medical journal articles to read, and you know, and so again, it's just that theme of like, we're on our own. And they talked, you know, in talking about this disease with us, they had read those articles too, and they said, you know, when she reaches her teenage years, this might happen. We sort of, you know, the trajectory of a typical person with this disease may be different from hers, but I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know you could have a disease, and you know, maybe you have it one way and live a long time, and maybe have it another way and don't. And so we left that meeting devastated, and of course, I mean, we talked about I asked directly the question of, you know, could this be a fatal disease, and they said yes, but you know, that we didn't leave with the expectation that Yaya's trajectory was what it was. But what we did do was we read those articles, and we connected with the person who had written them, and a neurologist in Montreal at McGill University, who's regarded as kind of the world's expert on the disease. And within a week, I think, we went to see her. It was the hardest trip of my life. And in fact, I mean, you asked about the day-to-day burden, you know, traveling, just leaving the house, but not to mention traveling with a complex child. You know, we had a nebulizer, we had a blender, because, you know, one of those like little food ninja blenders, because we had to make food for her feeding tube. We had a bag full of medicine, a feeding tube. And I remember going through security, AB, and the TSA person asked us to open up the bag. And I just lost it. Like I was doing all I could to just try to keep it together, and I couldn't. And I think this poor TSA person had was just like, oh my God, and felt terrible. But as we just emptied out this bag of one medication after another, and it was hard. And but we went to see the neurologist in Montreal, an amazing person, not only a brilliant person, but compassionate in a way that, you know, not all doctors are, and gave us, you know, really hard news, which was that, you know, the Yaya's case is more severe than what we had read about in the article, sort of typical 4-H, and in fact, the number of other people who had documented cases like hers was less than a handful. And you know, she knew of the outcomes of those people and asked if we wanted to, and we didn't. But you know, we knew that they were no longer living. We didn't know how or when or what have you. And so so we just left that meeting not knowing what Yaya's trajectory was, but knowing that it was serious. And ultimately, you know, she passed away only a few months later. So I'm really grateful for that knowledge of, you know, and but it was, so that meeting was really the first time when we, and I think, it was almost 9 months old at that time. That was really the first time that we understood really what we were dealing with.
9 months old. And me listening to it, it sounds like 5 years long. And you experiencing it, did you just feel like you had gone through a decade in 9 months? I mean, it just seems like a lot.
Yeah, a lot. So that's a nice, AB, that's a nice way to put it. In terms of, I feel like we went through a decade of not only, good and bad in a year. Um, we, all of this stuff was just devastating. And you can probably see that it's hard for me to talk about now. And you should have seen me then. It was devastating for our family, and of course for Yaya. But we had also amazing time together as a family. Like, to
Yeah.
your point about appreciating, we appreciated every day we had with Yaya. I think we all gave each other all of ourselves, and she to us. She was an amazing daughter. Um, our families were amazing. My parents, sisters, June's parents, even uncles, aunts. It was just such rich time together. So yeah, there was a lot packed into that year. Yeah.
And so Yaya passed and you had a chance to grieve, and it's the kind of grief that I know just can just go on. There's no stopping point, right? When you lose a child, you don't just wake up one day and it's done, right? And I shared this with you after I lost my twins, and it's not the same in that they never lived, but it stays with you. And I'm keen to understand from you where you got the strength, the passion, the just the let's do it, right? To go start this foundation. Because I think for a lot of people, something like this will just knock you out, right? And you decided, I don't want other people to go through what we went through, and we've got to do something about it. So tell me a little bit about that part of the journey.
Sure. Yeah. So, AB, like, we've talked about this. I'm very sorry for your loss too. And there's no comparing any of this stuff, but you suffered a really tremendous loss, and I empathize with you, and I'm sorry for your loss. And yeah, and thank you to you for sharing with me about it. But yeah, what I didn't realize it, I think, at the beginning. After Yaya died, it probably took me a couple of years to realize it, but grief is a really powerful source of energy. And in fact, there's another mom of a child. There's another mom in the leukodystrophy space of a related disease to ours that says, this is an amazing woman who says grief is a superpower. And I wouldn't,
Yeah.
I wouldn't, but when she said that, that's when I sort of understood that grief is a tremendous source of energy, and it can be, it doesn't have to be a superpower. It can be really destructive.
Yeah.
But if it's, I think, channeled, it can be really constructive and productive. And when Yaya was alive, we got her diagnosis. The first thing we did was, or one of the first things we did was look for, like, the American Cancer Society of 4-H leukodystrophy, the big, organized, well-funded patient group that was out there educating families, advocating on our behalf, supporting research, providing hope that kids with this disease would have answers one day. And we found a golf tournament in Cleveland, amazing family, amazing parents of a child with the same disease, but a pretty grassroots kind of effort. They put a ton of effort into putting on a golf tournament every summer and raising some money and then giving it to a lab to support research. And when the doctors would tell us there's nothing we can do, I didn't know that was a thing. I just didn't know that a kid could have a disease, and there's just we don't know what will happen. We don't have anything we can throw at it.
Yeah.
And I just I just wanted to change that. I don't want to accept that as an answer for kids like Yaya. And so we decided that we would start that, hopefully, well organized, well funded patient group. And so we reached out, we found that family on Facebook, and they were amazing. They are amazing. They're on our board now. We work together with them very closely, and we found another family in Oregon that has a young child who has the disease, and have done their own fundraising to support research.
Yeah.
And we decided, hey, let's join up here. Let's work together.
Yeah.
If we work together, the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts. And we formed the Yaya Foundation, and it's been incredible. 18 months ago, there was really no organized patient effort in 4-H leukodystrophy. Now, 18 months later, we're developing a collaborative research network of researchers and clinicians from across the world who have expertise areas that can bring to bear on this disease, and we're bringing them together to work together. And we, about 6 months ago, received an amazing grant from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. It's called a Rare as One grant. And Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is amazing because they've decided, hey, rare disease, a lot of people look at diseases like ours and say, oh, it's only a few hundred people, but really, rare disease as a category, there are 7,000 rare diseases, and some of them affect only a few hundred people. Some of them affect some more, some of them less. And if you say, well, it's only a few hundred people, so we're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah.
You're actually saying millions of people are going to be left out, because rare disease as a category is significant. And what Chan Zuckerberg Initiative does is they've recognized that, and they've put together a really innovative funding model, and we were privileged to receive a grant from them 6 months ago. And so
congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, so in a short time, we've really accomplished a lot. We've gotten this research network together. We've brought over $500,000 new dollars into our disease area that we're going to be investing in research that we hope is going to really change the trajectory for our kids, with we hope and think a lot more to come.
I mean, just your body language has changed, right? It's like there's this passion and excitement around the work. And just for every parent who unfortunately is in this situation, I'm so thankful that, the Yaya Foundation, you and your co-founders are doing something about it, because you're absolutely right. If you think about them as individual diseases, then it seems small, right? And people would have the argument, well, let's focus our resources on the cancers of the world and HIV and all of this. But it is a significant number. And I was doing some research, and as you can see, I'm in a zebra striped type dress.
Lovely.
And I brought this with me because I found out, I don't know if you know this, I found out zebra is the emblem of rare diseases. Because what I was trying to do was find out, we have the pink for breast cancer and red for, I think it's heart disease and HIV. So I was like, is there something? Because once you have a color, my theory is once you have a color, people are starting to recognize it for what it is, and it needs attention, and it needs, people need to be talking about it and engaged. So when I found it, I was like, okay, I'll wear my little zebra dress in solidarity, and I'll bring my son's little zebra from, I think we got this in South Africa. And every time I see this, I will remember Yaya by it. So I just wanted to share that with you, and to thank you so much for sharing your story with me and Mama Tok Tok family. Now, if people wanted to learn more about the foundation, or to follow the foundation or you, where can they find the foundation? where can they give donations, and where can they find out more about 4-H? How do you say that? I've been practicing and I can't get it right.
Yeah, leukodystrophy, 4-H leukodystrophy.
4-H
Yeah.
leukodystrophy. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, thank you, AB. No, so what we are trying to do is build a global community. This is a global disease. It affects kids everywhere, and it's going to take a global effort to do something about it. And so I invite people all over the world to learn about us and what we're trying to do and how we're trying to help. You can do that by going to our website, which is Yaya Foundation 4hl.org. And check us out. You can also follow us on Twitter at Yaya4HL and Facebook. And we invite you to check us out. We invite you to support. Supporting research is expensive, and so raising money to support it is a really important part of what we do. And we also just invite you to help share our story and raise awareness, so that you and your friends and family will just be aware of what families like ours and kids like Yaya go through, and hopefully think of ways that you can support us.
Yeah, so I will share all the contact information below. I do want to go back to a few things you said as we close. You talked about Yaya's smile, the 3 times remember her smiley, and I really want the audience to remember that in a bit to say we've got to enjoy the small things in life. It is so important. There's so much craziness going on in the world right now, and sometimes we just need to come back to base a little bit and say thank you for the smiles, thank you for the hugs, thank you for the little things that we take for granted, which families like yours unfortunately did not get as much as you would have liked. I also just want to thank you for sharing your story, Ron. I can say, sitting here, I know this was really hard for you, but on behalf of everyone who may be listening to you going through the same thing, thank you. Because sometimes I think there is just affirmation and comfort in hearing people talk about something you're going through, and you're just sitting there going, thank God someone understands. So thank you for being that voice, and thank you for all the work you continue to do.
Thank you, AB. Thanks for the opportunity to share our story. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your just attention to our part of the world. Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care, Ron, and my
You
love
too,
to
AB.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know about you, but Yaya's story was one of the most difficult I've covered to date as producer and host of Mama Talk Talks a Different Take. For more information, or if you want to donate to the foundation, visit www.yayafoundation4hl.org. Next week, catch my chat with guest Jessica Joan Richards. We talk weight, body shaming in the workplace, and that one LinkedIn post that went crazy viral. This is a sneak preview of Jessie's defining moment.
What kind of things would people say or do that would make you feel like I don't belong? Not because I'm Filipino or a woman, but because of my weight.
Weight is seen as such a massive thing in society nowadays, and you are very much judged for having extra weight or not enough weight, and people always seem to be interested in whether you're eating too much or you're exercising too much, and it becomes that conversation. It almost is as if the moment you step into a room and you are very clearly overweight, it's like this conversation becomes open for everybody to think about what you should be doing to help yourself and to think about what you should be eating.
How does that feel? Right? We've talked about the stuff that happened here, right?
I know, you want to know my heart.
Yeah.
It hurts so much. It's a really horrible thing. And if you allow me to be raw, and I'm already feeling myself emotional, I have been hiding for so long. Until this interview, I have been hiding behind my weight because I feel personally like I'm going to be judged for it anyway. So let them judge, and I will just be this, and I will accept life for how it's how life is being given to me. But actually now, ever since that post, I'm like, actually no, because there are things that I am happy with, and there's things that I can change, and that is on my turn. And you're being discriminated against, it hurts, and you don't want it to be personal, but it is really personal.